When Malcolm Carter took his place at the end of the pharmacy line at the Maple Street Drug at 4:50 on a raw Wednesday afternoon, he had to duck slightly under the low-hanging promotion sign, and a man 2 spots ahead turned around to look at him the way people look at something that does not fit in a room. The store smelled like cough syrup and rubber flip-flops and the sweet chemical smell of the candy aisle. Fluorescent lights buzzed. A radio behind the counter played soft holiday music nobody was listening to. 4 championship rings sitting in a safe 4 states away. A net worth past $400 million. One of the most recognizable faces his sport ever produced. In a plain gray hoodie, sweatpants, a knit cap pulled low, and sneakers with a worn left heel, fumbling a folded coupon and his phone in 2 enormous hands. And not one person in that line knew it. Because nobody expects a legend to be standing in line for cough drops in a neighborhood drugstore. And the mind does not put a fortune behind a man in worn sweatpants. He had been in line 90 seconds when the strangers started. The man 2 spots ahead, sharp suit, expensive watch, the kind of impatience that takes up more room than a person should, looked Malcolm up and down and said it loud enough for the whole line to enjoy. "Hey, big guy, you need a forklift for that coupon? Some of us got somewhere to be." A woman near him laughed. "Look at the size of this dude," he went on. "Playing to the line now. What are they feeding you, man? You lost? Big and slow, the worst combination." He turned back around, satisfied, shaking his head, muttering about people who hold everybody up. And Malcolm Carter folded his coupon a little smaller and looked down at the floor and said absolutely nothing. But he was not looking at the floor for long. His eyes lifted past the man in the suit, to the front of the line, to the counter, and 3 things settled into him, one after another. The first was the old woman at the register. She was small and stooped in a coat too thin for December, and she was counting coins out of a change purse with shaking fingers. And the young clerk behind the counter was looking at her with a face full of helplessness, because the number on the screen was $312, and the coins in the woman's hand were not going to get anywhere near it. He watched her count it twice, as if counting it again would change it. And then he watched her start, very slowly, to push the white paper bag of medicine back across the counter toward the clerk, putting it back. He had seen people put medicine back before. He knew exactly what that looked like, and it took the air out of him every single time. The second was in the old woman's other hand. She was holding a worn leather wallet pressed against her chest, the kind held shut with a rubber band, and behind a cracked plastic window in it was a faded photograph, soft and creased from decades of being looked at, of a little boy. Maybe 6 years old. Gap-toothed, laughing, she held that wallet the way you hold the one thing you have left, and she kept her thumb over the little boy's face like she was keeping him warm. The third he felt more than saw. When the man in the suit had snapped at the line a minute earlier, the old woman at the counter had gone very still. She had turned halfway and looked back at him, at the impatient man in the expensive watch, and she had stared a half-second too long, the way you stare at a face you almost know, before something made her drop her eyes and turn back to her coins. Malcolm caught it. He filed it away, and his own hand went, without him deciding it, to the thing he always carried in the pocket of his hoodie, a small, worn blue rescue inhaler, empty for 30 years, that had belonged to a boy who couldn't breathe. Now here is the part that nobody in that pharmacy line understood yet. The slow, fumbling giant they were laughing at could have bought the Maple Street Drug. He could have bought the whole chain it belonged to and not noticed the dent. The man they mocked for being big and broke and lost was none of those things, and he was standing in that line on purpose. For a reason that went back 30 years to a promise he made to someone who could not catch his breath. But there was a second thing nobody in that line understood. And it was the deepest thing of all, and it was standing 2 spots ahead of Malcolm in an expensive suit, mocking everyone, with absolutely no idea that the slow old woman he had just snapped at, the one putting her medicine back because she couldn't afford it, was the one person on this earth he had spent 25 years running away from. So stay with us for the whole video, because in about 4 minutes, a name is going to be read out loud at that counter, and when it is, the cruelest man in the line is going to come apart in front of everyone. And the giant they all laughed at is going to be the only person in the building who understands exactly why. Malcolm Carter grew up in a cramped apartment with a mother who worked herself to the bone and a little brother named Theo, who was the best person either of them ever knew. Theo was 3 years younger and small for his age, and he had asthma, the bad kind, the kind that turns a winter night into a fight for every breath. When Theo was breathing easy, he was the funniest, brightest, most relentlessly hopeful kid on the block, and when he wasn't, the whole family lived and died on the little blue rescue inhaler that stood between him and the worst. The medicine was expensive. It was always expensive. Their mother did the math broke people do. The rent against the inhaler, against the lights, against the food. And most months she found a way. And some months she had to choose. And she hated every choice. There was a stretch one brutal winter, the winter Malcolm was 14 and Theo was 11, when the money simply was not there, and the inhaler ran empty, and the pharmacy would not refill it without the cash. And the cash did not exist, and they stretched the last of an old one puff at a time. Praying, Theo had a bad night that February. The cold air and a chest infection and an empty inhaler, all at once. And in the dark, fighting for breath, with his big brother holding his hand and his mother on the phone begging anybody for help, Theo had used some of his last air to say the thing that became the spine of Malcolm Carter's entire life. "Don't be sad for me, Mal," Theo whispered, between the worst of it. "Just don't let it happen to the next kid. You're going to be big, and you're going to be somebody, I know it. So promise me, don't let the next kid die over a stupid little inhaler." Promise. Malcolm promised. Theo died before the ambulance reached the 3rd floor, 11 years old. For the price of a refill. Malcolm kept the empty blue inhaler. He carried it for 30 years, through every gym and every arena and every contract, a small light thing in his pocket that weighed more than anything he owned. And he kept the promise the only way a man can keep a promise to the dead. Quietly, all over the country, in pharmacies exactly like this one, in neighborhoods exactly like the one he came from. He stood in line dressed like nobody, and when he saw a person at the counter pushing the white bag back because they couldn't pay, he stepped up and he paid, and he never gave his name, because Theo had not asked for his name to be on anything. Theo had asked him not to let the next kid die. So he didn't. One counter at a time. The man in the expensive suit who had mocked him was named Wade, and Wade was the antagonist, and Wade was a wound walking around in a good jacket. Wade Kessler had grown up 6 blocks from where he was standing, dirt poor, in a home that fell apart around him, and he had left at 18 swearing he would never come back to this neighborhood, never be poor again, never be one of these slow, tired people in these slow, tired lines. He had built a whole life out of that vow, a sharp life, a life with a watch and a suit, and the only way he had been able to keep running from where he came from was to despise it, to look at the people in the pharmacy line and feel nothing but contempt. Because contempt was the only thing strong enough to keep the shame down. He had not spoken to his mother in 25 years. He had left after a fight he could no longer even fully remember the shape of, just the heat of it, and he had told himself she was better off, that he was better off, that the whole place was a thing to be escaped, and never grieved. He was back in the neighborhood today only because his cardiologist's office was around the corner and the pharmacy was on the way. And he was in a hurry. And a man in a hurry does not look closely at a slow old woman counting coins. He was not a monster. He was a frightened boy who had decided a quarter-century ago that the only way to survive his childhood was to hate it, and hating it had quietly cost him the part of himself that could still recognize his own mother's face. The old woman at the counter was named Doris Kessler. She was 70 years old. She had raised 2 boys alone in this neighborhood, and one of them had walked out at 18 and never once called, and she had spent 25 years not knowing if he was alive, carrying his 6-year-old picture in a rubber-banded wallet, because it was the last version of him that had still loved her. Her heart was failing now, the actual organ, and the medicine that kept it beating steady cost $312 she did not have. And she had come to the counter today the way she came every month, hoping the price had changed, knowing it hadn't. Ready to push the bag back and stretch the last of the old bottle 1 pill at a time. The way her family had always stretched things 1 at a time, all her life. There were 2 other people in that pharmacy who matter. One was the young clerk, Lacey, 22, working her way through a pharmacy tech program, who had spent 4 minutes quietly applying every discount and coupon and assistance code the computer would accept to try to get Doris Kessler's number down, and was near tears that the best she could do still left it at $312. Lacey was the one person who had not laughed when the giant came in. She had said, "Take your time, sir. No rush at all," and meant it, because Lacey treated everybody like somebody, which is rarer than it should be. The other was Miss Junie, 78, 3 spots back in the line with a cane and a basket, who had lived in this neighborhood her whole life and missed nothing. Miss Junie had watched the sharp man in the suit mock the big quiet fellow, and she had watched the big quiet fellow take it without a word, and she had her opinion about which of those 2 men was actually small. And when the mocking got bad, Miss Junie said one thing, loud enough to carry, in the voice of an old woman who has earned the right to say things. Some folks, she said to nobody and everybody, got a big watch and a little heart, and some got the other way around. You can't always tell from the size of the man. It came to a head fast. The old woman finished counting for the 3rd time, and her face crumpled, and she pushed the white bag the rest of the way across the counter and said, in a small, steady voice that had clearly said it before, "That's all right, baby. Just give me back the old bottle. I'll make it stretch." And she gathered her coins back into the change purse with shaking hands and turned to leave, clutching the rubber-banded wallet to her chest, and the man in the suit sighed loudly and said finally and started to step up. And Malcolm Carter, who had stood there silent through every laugh and every crack, stepped out of the line and put one enormous hand gently on the counter. "Ma'am," he said to the old woman, soft, "don't go anywhere. Your medicine's paid for." He looked at Lacey. "All of it. And whatever else is on her account, this month and going forward, that's handled too." He set a card on the counter without taking his eyes off the old woman's stunned face. "And anybody at this counter today who's putting something back because they can't pay for it, you put it back in their hands. Today and every day this month. Run it all on this." The line went quiet. The man in the suit turned around with something between a scoff and a question on his face. And Lacey, hands shaking now too, pulled the white bag back and scanned it and said, the way pharmacy techs have to, reading the label to confirm the patient, "Okay, so this is for Doris Kessler, date of birth." The man in the suit stopped breathing. "What did you say?" Wade said. His voice had gone strange. "What name did you say?" Doris Kessler, Lacey said, looking up, confused. Wade Kessler turned all the way around, slow, and for the first time in 4 minutes he actually looked at the slow old woman he had been so impatient with. Looked at her face instead of past it, and the years fell away in pieces, and the impatient sharpness drained out of him, and left something that looked like a much younger and much more frightened man standing in an expensive suit. "Mom?" he said, and Doris Kessler turned at the sound of a voice she had not heard in 25 years, and she looked at the sharp, impatient man who had been snapping at the line, and she had half known, hadn't she? She had stared a second too long, and now she knew all the way, and her hand came up to her mouth, and the rubber-banded wallet fell open on the counter, the faded photograph of a laughing, gap-toothed 6-year-old face up under the lights. 25 years and 3 feet away from the man he had grown into. "Wade," she whispered. "Baby, you're alive." The whole pharmacy held its breath. Wade Kessler looked at the photograph of himself that his mother had carried for a quarter-century, and at the white bag of heart medicine she had been about to put back because she couldn't afford to keep her own heart beating, and at the giant he had spent 4 minutes mocking, who had just quietly paid for it because Wade would not. And 25 years of running caught up with him all at once and put him on his knees right there on the pharmacy floor in his expensive suit, holding his mother's thin hands, saying, I'm sorry, over and over, like the word could undo a quarter of a century. And Malcolm Carter looked down at him, and he did not gloat, and he did not lecture, because he understood something Wade did not understand yet. He took the small empty blue inhaler out of his pocket, and he held it in his open palm where the man could see it. "This belonged to my little brother," Malcolm said quietly. "Theo. He died when he was 11 years old, in my arms, because we couldn't come up with the money for one refill of his medicine. 30 years ago. I have carried this empty inhaler every single day since, and I would give every dollar I have, all of it, this second, for one more hour with him. One more." He crouched down to the level of the kneeling man. "You spent 4 minutes laughing at a slow old woman in a line. And she is your mother, and she is still here, and her heart is still beating, and you almost walked past it. I buried mine. You still have yours. Don't you dare waste one more day of that." That was when Wade learned, and the whole line learned, exactly who the giant was. Malcolm took off the knit cap, and somebody gasped, and a man near the candy aisle said the name out loud in disbelief, and the people who had laughed at the slow, broke giant went silent in the particular way a crowd goes silent when it realizes it has badly misjudged something. What he did next, he did the way he did everything. Quiet and complete. He did not need anything from Wade but the thing he had already given him, which was the truth, and a living mother kneeling in front of him, and the heaviest second chance a man can be handed. He left the two of them on the floor of the pharmacy holding on to each other, because some things you do not interrupt. He found Lacey, the young clerk who had treated everybody like somebody and fought the computer to its last discount for a stranger, and he made her tuition and her tech program and the weight she'd been carrying disappear, and told her a person who treats the lowest customer in the line like they matter is the entire reason a pharmacy in a neighborhood like this is worth anything. He found Miss Junie with her cane and her basket, who had said the truest thing in the building, and he shook her hand a long time, because an old woman who can tell the size of a heart from across a room deserves to be told she was right. And then he did the big thing. The thing he had been building toward his whole life, without knowing this would be the day. He stood up in the middle of the Maple Street Drug, and he made the promise he'd made to a dying 11-year-old into something that would outlive everyone in that room. A fund, in Theo's name, that would cover the medicine. all of it. For every child and every elder who walked up to a counter in these neighborhoods and could not pay, so that no kid would ever again die over a stupid little inhaler, and no mother would ever again have to push her own beating heart back across a counter because the number was too big. He had been keeping Theo's promise one counter at a time for 30 years. Now he was going to keep it for good. A boy who couldn't breathe and used his last air to think about the next kid. A brother who carried an empty inhaler for 30 years and turned a deathbed promise into a quiet mission. A mother who carried her runaway son's picture for 25 years. A son who hated where he came from so hard he almost walked past his own mother. A young clerk who treated everybody like somebody. An old woman who knew the true size of a heart on sight. Theo had been right, gasping in the dark all those years ago. You're gonna be somebody. So don't let it happen to the next kid. Malcolm Carter became somebody, and he spent the whole rest of his life standing in slow lines dressed like nobody, watching for the next kid, and on the day they laughed at the giant for being big and broke and slow. The giant was the only one in the room keeping a promise to the dead. Don't let it happen to the next kid. So do me a favor before you go. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and tell us about the person in your family you'd give anything for one more hour with. If Theo and that little blue inhaler put something in your chest, hit that like button, not for us, but for every family that ever had to choose between the medicine and the rent, and for every kid we lost over a number on a screen. Subscribe and join this family, because we tell the stories of the people the world laughs at in line without ever once wondering who they really are. And there are more of them coming. There's another one waiting on your screen right now, and it just might be the one you needed today. Go on. We'll see you there.